I'm Mark Caro, and welcome to episode 215 of Caropop. If you'd like to throw us some support and help keep this thing going, please go to caropop.com. This week's episode is for anyone who likes to read or to write, as our guest is author Christine Sneed. Aside from being a wonderful novelist and short story writer, Sneed is one of the most savvy people I know about the publishing industry. Her Substack, Bookish, offers monthly agent lists as well as conversations with writers, information about contests, reflections on what she's read, and much more. She's a friend who used to live here in Evanston, Illinois, and still teaches at Northwestern University, but now is based in Pasadena, California. Sneed has received the kind of acclaim and attention that any writer dreams of. Her 2013 novel, Little Known Facts, received a rave review from novelist Curtis Sittenfeld on page 1 of the New York Times Sunday Book Review. Many authors would assume a front-page review like that would be life-changing. Was it? Sneed's follow-up novel, 2015's Paris, He Said, also received a positive Sunday New York Times review, as did her 2016 short story collection, The Virginity of Famous Men. Yet publishers, editors, and agents weigh an author's so-called sales track more heavily than critical acclaim and awards, several of which Sneed has won as well. In Bookish, she refers to what she calls the duality of commercial success and commercial misfire. Even though she thinks she's doing her best writing now, Sneed has struggled to get her recent work published. Yet she keeps writing because that's what she does. As she tells her students, the writing itself is the only guaranteed reward. In this conversation, Sneed looks closely at her own writing and the publishing industry. How much energy does she spend writing versus trying to get her work out into the world? What impact has moving to Southern California had on her writing and career? Does a writer now need to have a so-called platform to get published? How much of a problem is it that newspapers and other outlets keep shuttering their book sections? Why are so many agents and editors averse to getting back to writers in a timely manner? Has technology made it harder to focus on writing without distraction or interruption? Sneed and I talk regularly about our adventures and misadventures in the publishing world. Now you'll get to benefit from her hard-earned wisdom and humor as well. Please enjoy this Caropop conversation with Christine Sneed. Right after I met you, there's a Curtis Sittenfeld, giving you a page 1 Sunday book review, New York Times, of Little Known Facts and just raving about it. So I'm just like, wow.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean I think that's probably one of the things I've said to you over the years. Like, I really had a great ride when I started publishing books, and I think it's one of the things that I've noticed too with writers who make a big splash with one of their earliest books, and sometimes it just keeps going. But I think often when something happens pretty quickly and pretty easily, relatively speaking, you just think it's going to always be like that. And I did feel that, I'm just going to keep writing and publishing books with a big press, and that isn't actually what has happened.
People think a review like that is like a life-changing event. I mean, she's writing things like, her sentences are strangely hypnotic, casting a spell that makes it hard to put down. And she actually, I'm just going to read this part anyway. Indeed, Little Known Facts is the kind of book that makes you curious about its author and how she came to tell this particular story. When I finished Little Known Facts, I looked at Sneed's website, and only after not finding them did I realize I've been searching for mentions of her experience working in film, or at least living in Los Angeles, and at the time you lived in Evanston. And she writes, I still don't know if Sneed has firsthand ties to Hollywood, but I'll say this. I've spent years of my life reading People magazine as well as its more sordid counterparts, and her depiction of both proximity to celebrity and celebrity itself had me totally convinced. So
I was so happy about that. I mean, no surprise, because I actually really liked her work, and I still like it a lot. And but I mean, that's one of the things too that we talk about is, as a fiction writer, if you're writing real fiction, you're not writing autobiographical work, right. So I just was always interested in film and the fact that Americans, myself included, tend to just think that celebrities and films it's like that's our religion. So and fame seems to be just the best thing, and it's not, and we know that. And so I wanted to write about that. Like, why are we so interested in fame? But that book did really well critically. It didn't sell that well. I mean, I think it did all right, but it wasn't a bestseller other than for a brief period in a few markets. And then the Kindle edition was a bestseller when they offered it. for a really low price for a day or so.
Well, it's a wonderful book, and I love your writing in it as well as I've loved your writing in pretty much everything I've read of yours. But also part of what I love about it is that it's like writing is about you could write convincingly about things that you're interested in, not things that you've actually lived through. I mean, the whole point of it is, and it's kind of the point even in Curtis Sittenfeld being impressed by this, is that it's like, yeah, you weren't writing this as a Hollywood insider. You're writing this as someone who's interested in the inside of Hollywood, and there's a difference. And I don't know whether this is sort of a trend in general, that it seems like even since then, I mean, that book came out in 2013, that there's sort of almost more suspicion of writers projecting their own creativity onto situations they haven't lived through, whether it's characters who are not like them or professions that are not like what they've experienced. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, it's really difficult to, find a sort of middle ground, because, I've heard people say, I don't even want to write about my mother because that's her story. And that seems really extreme to me, whether they're writing memoir or fiction. But in this case, it was actually, I think, poetry or memoir. So I just thought, I get it if you're writing a caricature like portrait of someone who's not at all like you. But I think the complexity is more, it's applied more to if you're going to publish for profit something that's written from, someone's point of view that if you're writing about a person of color and you're a white person, it's tough to sell that. I mean, it's, if you have a person of color reading your book and saying, yeah, you got this right, I don't know. Like, I feel like we can't really tell each other what to write, but I do feel like you have to be respectful if you're going to write if that's not a character that resembles you, or is, maybe you're married to a person of color and you're a white person and they're helping you write the book in some way. But I haven't really been able to find a good way to navigate it. I mean, I tend to just write about characters, Caucasian characters or white characters like myself, because part of it is I feel like I'm more confident writing from that point of view, since it is the group that I identify with. But as a Eastern or Western European, that's my roots, but what do you think? I mean,
well, I was going to say, I agree with you. I mean, and there's a reason that now it's sort of having sort of a sensitivity reading when you're writing sort of outside of your group, and you want to make sure you're not culturally appropriating something or misrepresenting something. And that's sort of a standard thing to have, is like have other readers look at it. And I'm all for having, readers read any of my stuff and sort of flagging anything, the more you sort of go through it, as long as it's not kind of weird little formal litmus tests, if you're getting the spirit of things, I think that's great. I mean, with little known facts, I mean, your main character is an older kind of Harrison Ford, George Clooney like, movie star who is not obviously you, but that's not really an issue, because I think that we all sort of relate to that kind of figure, and there's not that kind of, I don't know, because that's such a privileged character, I guess he's sort of fair game. But you also, really sort of got inside that character through your imagination, not because you actually interviewed Harrison Ford and said, hey, what's it like being Harrison Ford? So that would have been a good excuse to talk to Harrison Ford.
Well, I know you wrote a novel that was a thriller or a mystery, or I think it's like a crime thriller that has, it's a different, there's several points of view, and one of them is a woman of color, but you have other characters who are.
Yeah, that's sitting on and it's notably not published. It's like sitting on my laptop. So we will get to that in terms of just like what the steps are and all of this stuff. Because but I've talked to you about it already, and I still haven't figured it out. But that's one where there are like a lot of different characters, and I will have to, if this thing ever gets close to being published, I will have to have readers just making sure that I'm, capturing these experiences correctly. It's also, about a chef, and I'm not a chef, but I've spent a lot of time with chefs. And so,
you've written, you've written for the Tribune and you wrote a book, The Foie Gras Wars, that is, it's about
duck livers.
Yeah.
Because I'm just a natural duck liver expert, it's like.
Yeah, you've written a lot about restaurants and chefs, and So yeah, I mean, it is hard. It's already difficult to publish fiction, especially if it's character driven and you're not a best-selling author or a debut author. A lot of the books that I see in the publisher's lunch or the publisher's marketplace newsletters that you can get free versions of every day of the week, Monday through Friday, which I'm teaching a publishing industry class right now for Northwestern. So, and I teach it usually every other year for the MFA program that I work for and in the School of Professional Studies. And, you know, I look at what's selling, and I don't have the comprehensive list because if you want a full subscription, it's something like $25 or $35 a month. But it's usually new writers, and they're writing genre fiction, or they're celebrities or influencers. And, you know, to be honest, I look at these books and the vast majority of them, I think there's no way I would ever want to read this. I still find lots of books to read all the time because there are still good books being published.
There are a lot of books.
Yeah, there's just so many. It's a sea. It's just like, it's a huge ocean of books that comes out every single year. And a lot of them are self-published. You know, a large number of them are meant for quick consumption, often ebook versions. You know, Amazon apparently has dozens, if not hundreds, of different tags that you can use to basically describe the sort of fiction, like erotic, non-binary, mystery, urban, you know, sci-fi, romantasy. I mean, those are all tags probably that you can use. And then self-publishing, I had a former student when I was a visiting professor at University of Illinois in Urbana who used to write like erotic lesbian fiction, I think, and she made good money. So that explained why she wasn't doing the homework for the class she took with me. But I think, but yeah, apparently she was making a good amount of money doing that as a side job.
Something I was asked, and this was already like 10 years ago, when I was trying to have something published. I think it was like sort of like a humor thing. But the first question from agents was, well, what's your platform? And there's a sort of sense that publishers, agents are acting this way because of the expectations of what the publisher's reactions are going to be. That like if you're an influencer, if you have like a TikTok, if you have a Substack with like 350,000 followers, then you have a platform and it makes it easier to sell, as opposed to like when I used to cover, you know, movies. I remember, I think it was Frank Galati was giving a talk, and he was talking about how you go into the studio and they would pitch something, and they would say, "Oh, that idea is execution reliant," which means it'll only sell if it's really, really good, as opposed to a lot of the things that they greenlight, which, well, that'll sell even if it sucks. And I feel like there's sort of that sense with books too, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, where it's hard to get someone to commit to an idea that's execution reliant, as opposed to, oh, here's this formula of 100,000 followers writing on this topic that people click on. And so there's already a built-in minimum we see the selling, whether your book is good or not, as opposed to, oh, I read your writing and I think you're really going to pull this off creatively. And so we want to believe in your vision.
Well, you know, maybe we've talked about this. I've certainly quoted this to a number of my classes. Back in like 2017 or 18 or 19, when Billie Eilish published a memoir, she probably has, you know, at least a few million followers on Instagram. And I don't know if she's on TikTok. I'm not on it myself. But she's memoir, popular. Yeah, she's obviously someone who's globally known. She's yes. Very, very successful as a musician. And so the press that published her memoir is probably, you know, like Scribner, one of the big five imprints. And by that, for anyone listening, big five are the main publishing houses in New York. And they also often have other offices in the UK. And they are the books that you see in bookstores that are usually in hardcover. They're almost all big five imprints. But she, you know, she only apparently in the first year or so only sold 65,000 copies, which is great if you're someone like me, or, you know, most fiction writers, that would be a dream number. But I suspect they thought, if you have like 3 or 5 or 10 million followers on social media, they were expecting at least 500,000 copies sold. So,
Right.
I mean, that's the problem. Like, you might have a lot of followers, but they don't actually read books, or they don't buy them, whether they read them or
If they're
not.
getting a lot of your content in other ways, maybe they don't also feel the need to buy
Hey,
a book size
yeah,
slab of content.
yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like, and this has been declared far and wide, I think, by quite a few writers and other people, maybe publishers themselves or publicists, even though they want you to be online and promoting your work, they know that social media really does not sell books. It might sell a few titles, and that's the exception that proves the rule, I guess, but it's not a reliable way to promote. No one knows what sells books. The same thing that William Goldman, of course, said about
Right.
Hollywood.
And
No one
nobody
knows
knows anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this first unpublished novel I have, which you have read very kindly, my pitch on that was just like, this is a book for book groups to argue about. I figured
Yeah,
if
the
you
one
can get in
about
that book group lane, that would be fine. But I have, it hasn't worked
Life
so far.
After
But
Death.
yes, so yeah, so
No, it would. I mean, we know that like so many books that aren't published, or we could just imagine anyway, since we don't know for sure, but a lot of the books that do take off, no one expected them to. Like, that was the joke about Seabiscuit. Apparently, that book didn't become successful until long after it had been published, at least a year or two, if
I
I
just
remember correctly. Yeah.
Yeah, I just read Susan Orlean's memoir, Joyride, and I had an interesting reaction to it. I thought it was interesting, but she was at the Boston Phoenix before I was, so we had some career overlap. And she was also doing the kind of stuff. And when I started reading it, I was kind of wistful, like, oh, she really had the career that I would have loved to have had. But then afterwards, I was like, no, because what she's talking about is just that feeling as a writer of sort of immersing yourself in some subculture and learning about people who are unlike yourself and telling their stories. And something like The Orchid Thief, which is another one of these fluke hits. I mean, nobody would think,
Yeah.
that these orchids down in, people who are stealing and, dealing orchids down in Florida, that's going to be like a commercial thing and they're going to make a movie out of it. And of course, it was so hard to adapt that you ended up with adaptation, which is brilliant in its own way, with Charlie Kaufman and Spike
Yes.
Jonze making it. But it's such a fluky thing. But like the one book I wrote, I mean, when I was working on my book, I was covering Hollywood and the entertainment industry for the Chicago Tribune. And so when I said I was working on a book, people were like, oh, what movie thing is it about? I'm like, it's about the ethical battles over fat duck livers. And that just, like, I sort of look back on that and I thought that was going to be the first of like a lot of books like that. And so far, honestly, it hasn't been. But on the other hand, I'm glad that exists. And it's sort of, reading Susan Orlean's book, it just kind of renewed in me, like, yeah, the joy of this stuff is learning things, not just kind of telling everyone what you already know.
She was interviewed recently talking about that book on Brad Listy's podcast, Other People, and she said, when you were describing her and her immersive writing style, and she said that when she was writing Orchid Thief and going into the swamp with the title character, and that she was like, it was just so scary because I worried there was going to be this poisonous snake when we were in the water, and I was thinking, like, what kind of wacko goes into the swamp to find this ghost orchid, and who would ever do this? And then she's looking at herself going, oh, look at what look at what I'm doing. I mean,
Right.
am I different? And I was like, that is so interesting. And it's really obviously one of the things that you're talking about, like the excitement of finding out new things, like you have a curious mind. And I think the best writers necessarily have to have a curious mind, or at least just someone who wants to be good, so I mean, yeah, I think, like, I tell my students, the writing itself is it's the only guaranteed reward, because if you think you're going to get rich or famous or garner the love of millions as a writer, it's not like it couldn't happen. It's just highly unlikely that it will. But like we've talked about many times, I love writing. Like I have a new short story that I finished on Monday, but now I'm just going through it to try to make it better. And I feel this sense of, urgency or just excitement about the fact that I have this work on top of all the other work that I do for money as a teacher. And I like my students a lot, and I think it's really good to have that structure, but writing fulfills a different need than teaching does, for sure.
I remember seeing Tony Kushner do a program. He was winning an award, I think maybe the Literary Prize at the Chicago Tribune, and he was being interviewed on stage. I think it was at the Symphony Center. And the one quote he said that stuck with me was, he's like, writing is a physical activity. You can have all the ideas you want and talk about it and everything else, but the actual doing the writing is like where all the creativity comes out, and that's where you realize what the thing is. And it seems like sort of an obvious thing. Well, like, of course you have to write it, although now there are people who think you don't. You just put it into, Chat GPT or something.
Yeah.
But that idea of it being a physical activity, because it's true, like a lot of things when I would write, like even like when I was reviewing movies, sometimes I'd come out of a movie and I'd be like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to say about it. And then I'd sit down and I'd start writing, and the ideas would kind of coalesce because I was doing the physical act of writing. And you like the physical act of writing, and that's where these stories that you're writing are coming from. And it's not out of some calculation of, oh, I'm going to do this for this market or something. It's because you write. That's what you do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's always the hope that the next story or the next book will find more readers than anything else you've written. I mean, those are things you can't control. I mean, other than if you print like 500,000 copies of your book and then like stand and accost people on the street and give them the copies, but they're not going to read them. They're going to throw them out the window. You'll find them in the street. But I think people who are really, that if you really want to be a writer, you do it because, like you said, that's just an integral part of your identity. And Adam, my partner, said to me, and I've maybe quoted this before, but he said, writers have to be crazy to keep doing it to a certain extent. I mean, if you're not making a lot of money or any money, it is kind of it is an addiction to a certain extent, so, and he says that as someone who's a therapist, like he realizes that there's a compulsion, but he's also like, this is what gives your life meaning. And whenever I'm in a bad mood, he's like, you need to be working on something, or just focus on what you can control rather than worrying about, is an agent going to read this? Am I going to, because we've talked about, I've had several agents. 2 of them just left the industry entirely.
My original one did too.
Yeah. The others I just parted ways with for one reason or another.
How much energy do you spend now writing versus trying to get your work out into the world?
I spend probably 85% writing and 15%. If it depends, it waxes and wanes. Sometimes it's more, like if I'm querying an agent. I have a new novel that, you actually have, I have a few unpublished novels, more than a few. I probably have like 5 or 6 unpublished novels that I'm actually proud of, that I think are as good as what I've already published.
See, that's crazy that you have this backlog of stuff that's not out into the world.
But as but as we were saying, it's like I'm a writer. And, I mean, people might be skeptical who are listening to this, and I get it, but it's not like I'm the only person who's read these unpublished novels. My former editor at Bloomsbury tried to buy 2 of them, but couldn't do it because of my sales track. But that, this was a while ago now. I look back and I'm like, it's been like almost 10 years since, my last book with Bloomsbury came out. It was September 2016, the story collection, The Virginity of Famous Men. And since then, I've published 3 other books. One of them was an anthology that I edited, but the other 2 are my books. And I, published them, one with a university press and one with an independent press. And the anthology was also with the second independent press. And I think those books are as good as the ones I published with the corporate press, with Bloomsbury. But, you can't, it's harder and harder to get character-driven, also known as literary fiction, in bookstores. Libraries are not ordering as many copies as they used to. And because they don't have the budget in some cases. And also small press books and university press books, they're more expensive sometimes than corporate books, which are usually, they have bigger print runs and bookstores carry them. Indie books are usually not carried by, unless it's like Grey Wolf or a few other well-known presses that manage to get, like Milkweed. They also often get their books in bookstores. But I mean, the thing is though, like the refrain is always, if you're a writer, you write. It'd be nice to make money too, certainly.
The sales track thing just drives me nuts because like unless you're sort of like this handful of writers who are like this brand name and everything they write is going to get bought just because it's like, oh, it's the new Michael Lewis book or whatever else, Stephen King.
Yeah.
It's like, it just seems to me that almost any book is going to be somewhat reliant on reviews, reception, topic. I read this one book I've read countless books by countless authors, but it's very rare that I've read every single book by each one of those authors. It's sort of like, well, that one's supposed to be good. That one sounds good. And the idea of, me not, getting a chance to read, the latest book by some writer because they had this other book that I didn't read that didn't do as well as the other ones. Like, who cares? It's like, if it's a good book, like none of like the most famous authors, are consistent. I mean, like Faulkner was up and down. Joseph Heller was up and down. It's like any of these authors, they have some that hit and some that miss. And it's like, but you want those great books,
Well, interestingly too, Anthony Doerr, who had a huge hit with his fifth book, All the Light We Cannot See, he'd published 4 other books, of course, before that were critically well received, but were not big sellers. I don't think any 4 of them were. He was on the map as someone who was very good at literary fiction, but because he hit the sweet spot with All the Light We Cannot See, with The Blind Girl, the Nazis, France, World War II, this jewel that was stolen, he had all these sort of hybrid elements. It was like a thriller, and then it was like historical fiction, and he was also writing, most of the chapters were quite short. So there were all these things. If someone, like, I know a lot about books, obviously, because I write them and I teach literature and creative writing and publishing. I'm like, these are all things that were probably very well managed by his editor. He himself had an instinct, perhaps, especially the short chapters. Maybe that was his editor or his agent's idea. But suddenly he's this 1 million copy author who now for a long time will probably be able to keep publishing his books, even if I don't think the one that came out after Cloud
Cuckoo Land.
Yeah, which I heard is good, but
it was terrific. We did that in my book group. I really, it's totally different from All the Light We Cannot See. It's like, it's a totally different kind of book. So I have no idea whether that helped him or hurt him or whether
if that book hadn't been a hit, he wouldn't have. If All the Light We Cannot See hadn't been a hit, I suspect he would be relegated to small presses, which is where many authors, myself included, are living right now. I'm so glad that they exist. They have challenges though, because they don't have enough resources to do a big pre-publication push to booksellers. There's so many ways that you can promote a book if you have money. And also with a big press, are you a lead title? Because if you're not, then you're not going to get much publicity support. So, because each season, a press will designate usually one nonfiction and one fiction lead title, and they get the lion's share of the publicity money and time. So the other 10 or 15 or 5 books on the list for that season, the authors basically have to do a lot of the publicity themselves, or I've hired an independent publicist for each of my books, Cheryl Johnston, who lives in Chicago, and she's helped a lot of writers. She's a good friend of mine. I mean, she doesn't charge me as much as this going rate, because it's usually at least $10,000 per book to promote. So most people don't have that kind of money lying around, especially if you're a writer.
Well, and then all these outlets keep disappearing, like Washington Post. Yeah, we don't need a book review section. The New York Times one is one of the last ones standing, but Tribune used to have, Chicago Tribune, we used to have a freestanding book section.
That's every Sunday, right? Or Saturday? I don't remember which day.
Yeah.
But Elizabeth Taylor was the editor, I know, for a while. And then Chris Borelli and Jen Jennifer Day, his wife, she was also at it. You know this all.
Yeah.
Obviously,
Yeah, and Chris will still get, book pieces in the arts and entertainment section. So that's good. I mean, but
and
they're
John
just
Warner.
there aren't,
Yeah, I'm
right,
sorry.
exactly. The big
Yeah.
bibliophile. There aren't the number of places you can sell this stuff. And it's true for musicians too, like a lot of the same issues are, like musicians who've had like big hits, but now they're putting out their own records, and radio stations don't exist and don't play the stuff, and then Spotify you get like no money off of, and nobody's
Right.
reviewing them because nobody's music writers anymore, and so then it's kind of scattered off in the diaspora of like these, if you have a popular music writer with a Substack, that's helpful, or a book writer for that matter, but yeah, that sense of you're going to pay $10,000 for a publicist to place your pieces in like a shrinking, number of outlets. It's just not a great equation.
And sometimes they can't place it with anyone. Like I have heard from different publicists that I've encountered, because they write to me because of my Substack Bookish. They ask me if I want to read forthcoming books and promote the author. Like, for example, I just got one from the publicist who is helping promote Kate Christensen, who is a multi-international best-selling novelist. And I'm thinking, she doesn't need my help, but maybe she does. Like, who knows? You just don't. I mean, she will certainly get reviewed in some of the main periodicals like the New York Times and presumably the LA Times. But yeah, I mean, there's just like publicists have to be scrambling, because other than podcasts and paid reviews you can pay Kirkus reviews for, there's the trades like Publishers Weekly and Library Journal and regular Kirkus reviews, as well as Booklist. They get so many books, and they don't tend to have the space for independent presses. I've heard that like Publishers Weekly especially is only doing big press books. I don't think that's actually true, but I do think they're doing fewer smaller press books for reviews.
By the way, earlier you mentioned the big five. Let's just like list them for our listeners right now. So you got
Penguin
Simon Schuster.
Random House.
Yeah.
Simon & Schuster, Hachette, Macmillan, and the
Scribner's?
Scribner. Is that, yeah, let me just check. I'll look up.
You'd said that one earlier, so that's why I was guessing, but
they might be, I don't remember if they're their own. Let me see. Big Five publishing houses. All right, let's see. Big Five publishers. HarperCollins, Simon & Schuster, Hachette, Macmillan, and Penguin Random House.
There you go.
Yeah, so those are they have dozens of imprints under each umbrella. So they might, and they also now have more audiobook like they have arms that just exclusively publish audiobooks. And audiobooks have sort of picked up the slack where more traditional forms of new books used to be sort of dominant, but people still buy hard copy books, and ebooks are still obviously selling, but more people listen to audiobooks than ever.
Really?
Do you listen to them? I don't listen.
I don't. I'm totally like an old-fashioned, old fart paper person. I want to sit on a big chair, turn on the light, and read. Or go on the couch. I don't read them on screens. I look at screens so much of the day. I'm just like, I want paper. Yeah, I mean,
there actually a lot of hard copy books are still selling very well. I've been reading more and more books on my phone through the Libby app, and also I've been buying more ebooks.
So you used to live in Evanston, which is when I met you. You obviously were working at Northwestern in person at the time. You've since moved out to Pasadena. You've been there for how long?
It'll be 8 years in June.
How has that changed your writing and your approach to the profession?
Well, I moved out here in part because I wanted to write scripts and learn how to write scripts. I sort of gave myself my own MFA. I took some classes. I read a few books on screenwriting. I read lots of scripts and just was writing screen material in tandem with fiction. But even though I did manage to get into the WGA by writing and directing a short film and using an approved WGA signatory, which is how you get into the WGA if you haven't written for a show or written a script that's been produced. But, I've stopped really pursuing a lot of film projects and writing scripts because I just realized, I could spend my whole life writing one script after another and never sell one. And I know that I can at least write short stories, and place them in reputable literary journals. And I want to keep writing novels and, ostensibly sell a novel to a big press again and actually get an advance that is more than 2 or 3 figures. Right. Which is, the anthology advance was $50, and please be advised, my novel and memos was small. It was a 3-figure advance. I did get some royalties, but I just realized that my default is really prose, and I teach novel workshops for Stanford, their continuing studies department. And then I also teach, of course, for Northwestern's MFA program in School of Professional Studies, where I'm faculty director too. And I love film, but I also have been very heartbroken to see Hollywood's there's just not many movies coming out of Hollywood anymore that I find myself wanting to see. So
most of the energy has moved to television, but there's a lot of television and there's so much being produced already that seems like that would be hard to break into also. And then you have to have
it is
idea that's going to work for over 12 hours with, where you're not going to resolve anything, because then you could just have season after season of unresolved cliffhangers.
Well, and also especially after the 2 strikes, the SAG-AFTRA and the WGA strike from 2023, that spanned many months. The deals that they worked out were not helpful for most writers, or maybe it was 2024 when the strike, I don't remember exactly, but it squeezed even more people. And, LA, a lot of people have left apparently because they've lost their sources of income in the film industry or the TV, with the streamers. And then also the consolidation of Warner Brothers. I mean, they're trying to sell, obviously, Warner Brothers, and there's, a bidding war, but Skydance and Paramount. I mean, it's just there are fewer jobs and there are fewer people making a livable wage. It's just what happened, of course, in the Midwest and the Rust Belt with factories in the 80s. I mean, maybe not just but there are parallels to, how cheaply can we make this? But we'll keep paying dividends to our stockholders. That's one of the things that I read. There was a really interesting Harper's article, cover story a year or 2 ago about, the fact is when a streamer or some studio acquires other studios, their balance sheets then are improved, their quarterly earnings go up. But then apparently instead of reinvesting that money in new work, they pay out a huge amount of money to their board or their stockholders, their shareholders. So they're not actually reinvesting in new property. Yeah. So there's fewer people. These
hedge funds owning these, Alden, where they just make all this money and just give it to the shareholders and don't put any of it into the newsrooms.
And they don't need that money. They don't they don't need it. They're already multimillionaires, but that's another conversation.
Right.
It's just sad. I just feel very heartbroken at times. And I mean but the thing is the way that I've been able to manage my own response to a lot of the things that have been happening, which I think we can say have been categorically bad and, politically and also just creatively for millions of people. I'm just I'm still writing. There's still things I want to write. And as we talked about before, if you're a real writer, you keep writing. I mean, obviously not every single day. I'm not as productive as John Updike was or Joyce Carol Oates, but I usually have something that I'm working on. So it helps me, it's my ability to stay tethered to a sort of optimism, even if it wavers at times, that, things will change for the better somehow, at least, professionally.
Right. All the business industry stuff aside, being in Southern California, do you find like you're writing differently or different things than than when you were, or if you'd stayed in the Midwest?
It is funny. I find myself writing more fiction that's set in Chicago. When I was in Chicago, I wrote Little Known Facts, which is set almost exclusively in LA.
Right.
And The Virginity of Famous Men has some stories too that are, one of them is sort of like a sequel. The title story is a sequel to Little Known Facts. It's the last story in that collection. And, but I find that that's not uncommon. A lot of writers find that they're much more able to write about a place that they know well after they leave.
Yeah. Well, Peter Orner, he writes these Chicago books while he's up at Dartmouth and was in the Bay Area before that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he'll dig into Chicago or dig into the North Woods of Wisconsin or something. So maybe getting that distance from it is helpful for you as a writer, as opposed to just being in the middle of it.
You as a journalist, but also a fiction writer. I mean, Chicago is really your milieu. Would you say that? I mean, that's
it's kind of the default. Yeah. Yeah, because why not, too? It's like plenty of stuff is set in L.A. anyway, and I just haven't come up with any sort of specific things that are set somewhere else. So, like, again, the two fiction works that nobody listening has read, one of them is set in kind of, a nondescript, not specifically Chicago, but basically Chicago western suburb. And the other one, the chef thriller, the culinary thriller is set more specifically in the Chicago area. Fictional suburb, but it's clear kind of where it is.
I remember some of it was set on the North Side. I read, I think, the first 60 pages when you were still working on it, and I loved it. It was like
kind of north, a little bit North Shore, and but references to the sort of Chicago food scene, because I covered the Chicago food scene a lot. So
yeah, I mean,
and it's fun. It was before I wrote it before The Bear. Now, like, I don't know whether The Bear helps it because it shows that people are interested in Chicago foodie stuff, or whether it's like, oh, you're just being derivative. So I don't know. People obviously, I think it'll rise and fall on. I don't know. Here's like another point, which I find a frustration, which is simply the nature of the beast, which is that in a novel or nonfiction book, even a proposal, it just takes longer to consume than if you've recorded a song or an album. Like, you could send someone your album, and a lot of times people are resistant to, I don't want to hear new music. But, putting on a song for 3 minutes isn't that much of an investment. But if you have like some slow burn of a novel where it kind of picks up steam 100 pages into it or something, like that might work great on the literary side, but work terrible on the trying to sell it to someone, because everyone's so impatient, and it just takes too long to commit to a book unless you want to read the whole thing, and then in the business side, you want to sell it.
There's this group in Brooklyn. I can't remember the exact name, but it was another writer / activist who was interviewed by Brad Listy on his book podcast, Other People, and this guy was like, we have to reclaim our attention. It was, the term attention economy, I'm sure you've heard about it, a lot. It's everywhere now. But he was just saying, like, everyone just sort of gives up, like, oh, it doesn't have, this is the way it is. This is, social media with commercials everywhere. And he's like, no, it doesn't have to be that way. Like, we don't have to be on these platforms, and I find it, this is a tangent, but I find it maddening. Like, now that if you're on Amazon watching shows and you have Amazon Prime, you also now have to pay a premium fee to watch stuff without commercials. And I looked at my credit card bill for last year, and I paid $201 to Netflix for my subscription. And I don't watch it that often. I mean, the thing is, it's a good deal if you think of it in terms of, like, let's say you go to the movie every other week, you're going to be spending well beyond $200. But, you need like 6 platforms if you want to be able to see.
Yeah, if you still have cable like we do, because we haven't cut the cord yet. So there's like this huge Xfinity bill on, and then there's the Netflix, then there's the this and the that, and it's like, oh my god,
HBO
like,
Max,
we're so dumb.
Peacock.
We're so dumb to be paying for so many different things right now.
Oh, and I'm just like, we watched it's actually a really interesting documentary, Soul Power, which is on the ABA, the American Basketball Association. And Adam, my partner's father, was actually instrumental. He was one of the attorneys who helped set up the league. And then also the merger that happened badly. In fact, it's with the NBA. It's a really interesting documentary, but we're not going to pay the extra money so we can watch this without commercials. But you can see why people do, because it's frustrating when you're watching something and then suddenly 2.5 minutes of commercials or whatever, so I'm railing against it. But like that's one of the things that I find, like as a writer, I can reclaim my focus and my attention and my thoughts every single time I sit down to write something. But it's not easy, because unless you're turning off all your internet, there's going to be the temptation to check your email or your Substack or whatever it is. And you're getting texts from people. I often leave my apartment to go write in a park nearby, because I just don't want to be distracted by like, oh, I need to do the laundry, or, oh, I need to make.
I know. I totally relate to that. Do you write on a laptop? Do you do anything in a notebook by hand?
I have a desktop and a laptop, so I write on both. But sometimes I will print pages. I used to do this all the time, where I would print pages and edit on the page and then go back to my computer. But I don't always do that anymore, because sometimes I think I've just been working on my computer so much that I am okay editing on this in the Word doc now.
I've been doing this thing where I just set a timer on my phone, even if it's just 20 minutes. Like this morning, I was like sort of working on revisions on this other thing I've written, this play, and I just set the timer for 20 minutes. Even though I'm working on my computer, I'm like, because that timer is going, I am not going. When I get the little boo for an email, I'm not going to look. They can wait 20 minutes, 20 minutes is not a long time. And then if you get on a roll after the timer goes off, you can keep working for as long as you want, which I did. I went for a little longer, so that was good. But just something that forces you to not check your email and change the laundry and pick up that pile of stuff that's on the coffee table and play with the cat. I have a lot of distractions at home, which are nice, but it's also, when the advantage of being at the Tribune Tower, as long as I was while we were still in the Tribune Tower, was just, you're just in this crummy little cubicle and, with like spiders going on the windows behind you, and you just sat and wrote or made calls, and you weren't, sort of thinking about all the distractions in your house, or like, oh, what record would go well with this? I think I'm going to put on some albums,
I mean, I think too, for me, the pandemic really made it harder. Like if I have ADHD, it started in earnest with the pandemic, because even though I was already working at home, teaching mostly online, I did have to go to campus when I was teaching at CalArts for a little while, which was just up in, Santa Clarita area, Valencia. And I just found that because everyone was inside, everyone was online for that year or two, it just totally fucked up my focus. It just really did. I just really had, and now it's still like, it's not gotten better. I mean, but I find that I'm more aware of the fact that it's so easy to be distracted. And apparently if you're working on something and someone texts you and you respond, it's the average time it takes to refocus is 23 minutes. Now, I don't think that's.
I believe that.
Everyone,
no, I believe it. It's like sort of stunning, but it's also like, I find it's like the same thing. Like I was, again this morning, it's like, oh, you had a bill due, you forgot to pay, calling the insurance agency, whatever. That's why, like, that sort of. And honestly, I feel like I should do it like multiple times a day. Like, okay, now I'm going to work for an hour on this, and I'm not going to look at anything, because it's sort of sad that I feel the need as a grown up, mature person. I need to like have my phone just force me to not be checking things, instead of me just being like, you know what, I'm just not going to check Twitter for a bit, or whatever you want to call it now, or I'm not going to look at emails, I'm not going to look at texts. And I know. And like texts are especially in cities, because people really feel like if you don't respond immediately, something's wrong. And sometimes like I just don't see it, or sometimes I'm in the middle of something, If I go swimming, I'm not checking my texts.
Yeah. Texts are so, I have friends who just don't respond. Like they will wait. Sometimes they forget. And this has happened to me where I don't see them all the time. And you can hide the alerts too, so that the phone doesn't ding. But I actually sometimes will send an email instead if it's not urgent because I just don't want to interrupt people. It's like someone standing at your door knocking and knocking and knocking and knocking. And, texts are great. Like if you're going to the store and you ask your wife, like, oh, Mary, do we need eggs? But otherwise, I don't know. I find they are really disruptive.
This is a total aside, but I find it fascinating how technology has made like the job that I had for a long time, which was being a newspaper reporter, harder. Because it used to be I would sit in my cubicle, I had a headset on, I had a phone right there, and I would just call people. And then I would leave a message with a human being, usually if they weren't there. And then I'd call someone else, or I'd reach them. They'd be in their office and they'd talk to me. They'd be like, oh, Mark Caro from the Chicago Tribune, blah, blah, blah. And you'd have a conversation. And I feel like now when I'm reporting anything out, you have to send an email and get on their little Google calendar or some other calendar.
Yeah.
Like sometimes the people will send me like, oh, I have an opening next Thursday at 2. And I'm like, well, can you just get on the phone for 5 minutes and I just like have a couple questions, but like technology in theory makes it easier to reach people, but like nobody picks up the phone anymore. Nobody has, receptionists. Not that, I need people to have receptionists, but I didn't have a receptionist at the Tribune, but I just had voicemail and someone would leave me a voicemail and I'd call them back, but nobody calls anyone anymore. You need to text them permission on when to call. And it just,
well, and the last thing that people often use their phones for is to make actual calls.
Yeah.
They're using the apps and they're buying stuff and listening to podcasts like yours. I love that about my phone. But yeah, I mean, the phone is almost just a sort of afterthought these days, the actual functioning phone part of it. It's a computer, obviously, an incredibly powerful and seductive computer and it also tracks all of our movements. So it's insidious in a way that, I mean, people are thinking about and reckoning with finally, but the horse is well out of the barn. So anyway, I think as writers, there is an evolving awareness of how important it is to be the one in charge of your thoughts and to be able to focus, because kids, as the father of 2 children, how dependent they doubtless are. I mean, I assume they're very dependent on their phones, and I'm so glad we didn't have them when we were growing up. But, they're here, and we have to live in a world where they're now ubiquitous.
Right.
And I think we have to really try to convince people to, like you said, you like to read a book on the page, like an actual hard copy. It's not going to be easy, but I think the more we talk about it, just be like, go somewhere, even 15 minutes, and do not look at your phone. Read a book, write in a journal. Anyway, I mean, I think there are people who really do want to do that, young and not so young, who are.
Yeah. I mean, having to commute for me when I was commuting downtown to the Tribune every day, that added to my reading time, because I would be like, okay, for this 20 minutes, half hour, I'm just going to read, and it's going to reset my brain, and I'm going to move from my home area to my work area. And now, with a lot of us working at home, it's you sort of have to create these, divisions, and some oh, I went down the stairs, I'm moving into the work area, but it's where I pet the cats. So you have a wonderful Substack that has a lot of great, I hate the word content,
features.
Really good features, interviews, and then also information. I mean, you've posted, I think, 39 agent lists, just to sort of give people help in navigating this industry and how frustrating it is. And you've become this real sort of service for that. So tell me about how you started that.
I really was feeling at sea, even though in 2023 is when I started it in March, mid-March. And so it's been almost 3 years now. I was feeling at sea as a writer because I just felt isolated. And even though I had Please Be Advised and the anthology come out the previous October, it was October 2022. And I'd done a few events here and there. There's just so much that's vying for our attention. And I even though I teach and I'm publishing short stories with magazines and occasionally book-related nonfiction in various periodicals like New City and The Rumpus, etc. I just felt like I didn't have a real purchase or a real grounding anymore in the literary community. And a poet that I know who's a friend of mine, Sean Singer, when I saw him at AWP, the Associated Writers and Writing Programs, in that year in early March of 2023, he was like, oh, I do a Substack. It's called The Sharpener. And I, publish poems that are curated by me. And I also publish craft essays on Saturday. He charges, there's a free subscription, but he also has paying subscriptions so you can get the craft essay on Saturday. So he's like, I actually make good money. It's not like a huge amount. Like George Saunders apparently makes like $500,000 or more a year on his Substack. It's crazy how much he earns. I mean, he's a great guy and he's such a gifted writer and teacher. So I get it. But, there's like anything, there's always the few people at the top who make an enormous amount of money. And, you just have to sort of carve your niche and not expect to make a huge amount of money unless there's some miracle, which is the same thing with publishing a book. But I felt like I'm just going to try to be part of the literary community more visibly than just publishing interviews with authors and in a few periodicals here and there, and then stories, etc., with fiction, with journals. And I started publishing twice a week, but then I realized I think every 6 days is more manageable. And I was doing humor stuff, humor pieces initially, and then also practical information. Like you said, I posted a tutorial on how to write an ancient query letter. I teach that in the publishing industry class that I mentioned that I teach at Northwestern, and some other, like submission deadlines for book prizes, literary magazines, fellowships, also like writers' residencies. I have 2 lists that I curated. And a lot of this information some of it I initially put together in this career packet for my students at Northwestern for when they graduate. It's like 50 some pages. So
that was good of you to do.
Thank you. I just thought it would be, some of them take the publishing industry class with me and some aren't able to fit it in. And I just thought this would be useful because when I was an MFA student, there was a tiny bit of conversation about the professional aspects of being a writer after you graduate, but not a lot. And so a lot of this was actually based on a career packet that I got long after I graduated from my MFA program at Indiana and Bloomington. And I thought this is something that my students here should have too. So, yeah. And then I just have sort of continued to do the same sort of posts with, you're on there, like there's an interview with you, I think, for 2024. And I think it was a tie-in to Caropop. And yeah, it's mostly authors like you, but also you're a podcast creator and you're doing a lot of interesting movie criticism too, or you have done that. So
right.
I've cast kind of a wide net.
Yeah, we should do a separate episode just to handicapping the Oscars at some point. Because we're both movie nuts on top of everything else. I really think you should do a Substack, Mark, because as I said 2 years ago, one of the funniest movie reviews I've ever read was one you wrote about some really awful comedy. I don't remember which one it was, but it was so funny. Oh, thank you.
It was just like this, it was this like jokey, but also very descriptive sort of like, and then they did this, and then they did this. And it was lampooning the movie, which was just idiotic.
Well, the beauty of having any sort of outlet is just then you're not asking permission on what to write all the time. And that's one of the things I miss most about, my old job is that I just generally had ideas. And I'd say, I want to do this. And they'd say, okay. And now it's like, I'm not even getting into it. But jumping through a lot of hoops for nothing is one of the problems with being a freelancer right now. But
yeah, you're a real writer. Like like I told you, Ty Burr, he has a really good movie. He's not on Substack anymore. He uses a different platform, but you're like him. Like you've been writing movie reviews for a long time and you know a huge amount about it. So I hope you'll do it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Do you get a lot of feedback on your Substack posts? Have people said to you, oh, I found this agent thanks to you, or any of that sort of thing?
I do occasionally get notes from people who said, oh, I entered this contest. I'm so glad you told me about this and this happened. And once in a while, I think What, yeah, I mean, I do hear from people about, oh, this agent list was really helpful and I didn't know where to start. I don't know. I can't remember. It's possible that someone has told me they managed to get an agent. I think maybe once or twice I've heard that, but probably a lot of people just don't get in touch. They're just happy to. They're glad it worked out, but
well, no, and honestly, it's just like it's such a service that you're doing because, again, you're an artist, you're a creative person. Again, your focus, again, 85% of your energy is in writing, and that's the thing that drives you, that enlivens you, and everything else. But you're also a realistic, person about what's going on in the industry, and you're very up on it as well, and you're sharing that, and that's a totally different set of circuits in your brain that have to navigate that as opposed to navigating what this character should do at this crossroads in this thing you're writing.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I find it's good to not be in my head so much. I'm sure it feels like a relief to a lot of writers when they could not think about their own work, and help other writers in some way. If that's, I mean, many of us are, I think, open and generous with what we know. I mean, not everyone. I had a conversation with a friend a long time ago who's an artist, and we were talking about, like, what do you do when you feel envious of someone? And I said, I just try to celebrate their success too, instead of pout, because it's just not a good feeling when you're, feeling envious or jealous and muttering to yourself in your lonely room. I feel like as soon as I will congratulate someone, even if I don't like them personally, I feel better. Like, okay, I'm not being a jerk. And that's another thing, like, tangentially, for self-promotion, I feel much more comfortable promoting other people's work than my own. And I would say 80% of the time, promote other people's work, 20% your own. And obviously, when you have a new book or a new record or movie or whatever it is that you've created or podcast, you have to do some self-promotion. But I just generally have a better time. If I have to promote myself, I also try to promote someone else in the same post.
You're really good at that. And you'll also someone will have a book come out and you'll do the bookstore event with them and you'll ask them questions and moderate it and help them.
I love that. And I'm always happy when someone asks me if I'm, able to do it, because it's just it's an honor. It really is, because you've done that a lot.
I enjoy it too. Yeah, it's great. You guys can ask me. I know. Yeah, Printers Row hasn't been for a while, but I was always happy to do it when I did.
Yeah.
So, and then just some stuff at bookstores here. I'm always happy to do that.
I mean, that's one of the things I mentioned earlier at the very beginning of our talk. I thought, like, oh, this is going to be easy. I have a book with Bloomsbury, then I have another book, and then I have another book, and I got a New York Times book review cover and all this. And it wasn't easy, and it hasn't been, other than those first few years. Searching for an agent is sometimes you get lucky. Like the first agents that I had, a few of them approached me because they read something that I'd published somewhere. And then when I queried to get a new agent, they took me on right away. But in the last few years, I have had to query many agents with books that, in one case, my dream agent responded immediately and he asked for the book. And I knew it would be the sort of book that he would want, but then nothing. And I wrote to him, 3 months later, didn't respond. And that's it. And then I see, yesterday I was looking up this writer whose short story I really liked in the new Best American Short Stories. And she's repped by this guy and she has a book coming out with FSG. And I thought he really would be the perfect agent for me. But you just have to get past the heartbreak. It's not your fault. Like, I know I'm a good writer. I know I have all these credentials. But for whatever reason, he didn't probably read even a word of what I sent him, even though he asked for it immediately. Because usually if an agent reads any part of your book, they respond. They'll say, like, sorry, it's not for me. But, they're inundated. So they might feel like, oh, I want to read this. But then they don't, because something interrupts them. And then it just gets pushed down farther and farther until it's out of view and they've forgotten about it. And they just don't want to be bothered. Yeah. And that's just luck of the draw. It's hard.
the lack of
universe is
response.
heartless.
Yeah, the lack of response just drives me crazy.
Oh,
and
I hate it.
then when they say, like, I have one again, I have this book out with this agent right now, and at the beginning of January, he's like, "Can I have another 3 weeks?" He's like, I'm gonna get back to you in 3 weeks. I'm like, great. Then after 4 weeks, I wrote back, said, "Hey, just checking in." Say nothing, and that's like another like 2 weeks have passed, 3 weeks have passed, and this was like sort of months after I sent this thing to him. I'm just like, all right, so don't count on that. Don't hold your breath. Do you send stuff out to multiple agents at once, or do you sort of wait to hear from someone who you're really interested in before you then approach someone else?
Well, I've learned that, even with these promising beginnings, like this guy that I wanted to work with who asked for the book right away, I don't think I queried for a month or so. And then when I didn't, after he asked for the book, maybe I queried a few other people just because I knew, I'm like, chances are it's not going to work out. Or happy scenario would be 2 of them want to rep me. Then I can talk to them and decide.
Right.
But I do tend to query at least a few people at the same time because I just know it's highly unlikely, because I am a literary fiction writer and I'm not a best-selling author and I'm not a debut. So, and I have a sales track. So those are all really difficult things to surmount, and agents know it. And even if they know you're a good writer, I've gotten several responses from agents who've said, "This is really good, but I just don't know how I would sell it."
That kills me. If it's a good book, sell it. Figure out a way to sell it. That's your job.
I think that the hardcover model is really problematic, and also paying a huge amount for just a handful of books. And that beggars the entire industry, other than the few very successful people at the top. Hardcover books probably aren't going to go away anytime soon because the profit margin is much bigger. If you charge $32 for a hardcover, you discount it 40 to 50% for the bookseller, 40% for brick and mortar, and probably Amazon. Just, they're the ones who obviously are responsible for a lot of the bad changes in the industry. But paperback, if it's $20, the margin's so much smaller. And hardcovers don't cost more than like $7 or $8 to produce, apparently, unless it's changed drastically. Maybe it's $10 or now, but paperbacks probably cost like $4 or $5, but it also depends on the print run. So I remember my editor at Bloomsbury telling me, or someone telling me, that Little Known Facts, for example, I think it was $25 or $26 in hardcover, and it costs like $6 or $7 per book. So that's, a big margin that even with the discount to bookstores, they're still making several dollars on each sale. And
right.
Bookstores make a lot more too, because 40% off of $26, that's several dollars as well that they're making per book. But people don't really want to buy hardcovers because they are so expensive, and they would much rather buy audiobooks, ebooks, or paperbacks. And I think that's the thing I was going to tell you about Mike. He's like, we should really just be doing paperbacks, ebooks, and audiobooks, because it's madness to be charging this much for one book that you're going to read once in most cases. And the industry is just so hidebound. And then, putting all your resources into just a couple titles and leaving everyone else to flap in the wind.
Right. That seems like a big problem.
No wonder everyone's so, screwed for the most part, because, if you're not publicizing books properly and there are no book sections anymore, it's what the hell, anyway, it's a miracle when a book becomes a huge success.
I remember the other thing I was going to mention, by the way, was that you'd said you had an example of like a Pulitzer Prize winner who had posted something.
Oh, right. He's a pretty well-known writer who back in the 90s won the Pulitzer for fiction. And he posted on his Facebook page about how he had applied to AWP's, Associated Writers and Writing Program's Agent to Writer program, which they offer now when they hold their annual conference. And so he had applied with his query letter in the first 5 pages of his book, which actually was based on a short story that he published in the 90s as well, that was really it's still famous. It's still pretty widely anthologized. But he was rejected. There were no agents among the 36 agents who are in this program who were interested in his query. And he got a lot of responses of sympathy. And I mean, no one said point blank that I could see. I didn't read all the comments, but no one said, well, you're, a white guy in your 70s. And unfortunately, I think that's a lot of it. Because he's not looked at as trendy, regardless of how skilled he is as a writer. And agents are just like, you know what, this probably isn't going to sell, because very likely they know more than he does how hard it is to sell fiction, because they've been trying to do it probably. Most of them have been agents for at least a few to several years. So they know, like, this isn't going to sell.
So the lesson is just keep your head down and write great stuff anyway, and try not to think about it too much.
Well, he could go, with an independent press. University of Wisconsin Press is actually publishing quite a bit of fiction and memoir too. I mean, and University of New Mexico, they also are publishing fiction on occasion. Northwestern I published my most recent story collection, Direct Sunlight, with Northwestern University Press. They publish quite a bit of fiction. They have a couple of imprints, Tri-Quarterly Books and Curbstone Books, that is under their umbrella. They publish quite a bit of poetry. They publish nonfiction, personal narrative. There's a lot of University of Illinois. They do Indiana University Press. They all pretty much do publish fiction. There's also like Chicago Review Press, University of Chicago Press. I don't know how much fiction they publish, but a lot of these presses, these independent and university presses, are doing a huge amount of interesting work. But getting the word is discoverability. How do you actually get people to discover or find these books and buy them? That's the part that's so hard. Because even someone like Billie Eilish, she's not going to sell millions of copies just because she has millions of followers on social media. But I think the problem is, and this is something, I don't know if Michael Lewis still does this, but he does not take an advance. And he has had a very fruitful relationship with Norton. They've been as published since Liar's Poker, his first book in the 80s. But he's made millions of dollars for that press and for himself. He's lucky. He's also great. I mean, he's a great writer at what he does. He's just really, he's a pro. He's their cash cow to a certain extent, but he's also reliable. But no one could have predicted that. So I think he just counts on royalties. Most agents don't like that because the advance is the only guaranteed money.
Right.
But I mean, they could potentially offer more reasonable advances across the board, but they don't do that because, well, if Stephen King, I don't know, he's probably not a terrible example, like someone who just is like taking $4 million and he's going to walk if he doesn't get it. But that's the thing, like the big authors who make so much money, some other press will get them if their current press doesn't keep ponying up these huge advances. The industry apparently makes like 4% profit every year after year after year, no matter what they do.
Which is not huge.
No, not at all. No, because they don't, they have, like I said, they keep doing hardcovers. They keep paying way too much for a tiny number of books. They don't promote the books on their list evenly or equally. They publish too many. So, and they also now are being flogged to report quarterly earnings, which is one reason why we're in this sort of, shit show of a publishing ecosystem with a lot of stuff that, like, I'm like, who is going to read this book? Like, what? Anyway, I'm starting to get like riled up, and because I actually have to talk to a former student. She's actually for an agent, so I have to. I have to talk to her. Well,
Christine, it's always a delight, whether, on being recorded or not. It's always a delight to talk to you and to read your work, which I will encourage everyone to do. And also to get your Substack, because it's very entertaining and helpful. So it's good content.
Thank you. Good content. And I really, really want you to write a Substack.
All right.
If I have to like pretend I'm Mark Caro and start a Substack and start writing goofy movie reviews or like,
and then I have to step in to like, no, don't read that. Although you'd probably do a good job if your assignment was to write goofy movie reviews in my voice, I would be totally down with that. That would be a Substack. I would pay to read that myself.
You could actually, I really think you should do like vintage Mark Caro movie reviews. Like, it would be so much fun if you just posted some of your old reviews, like on the anniversary of those movies' releases. This is what I thought about this movie. This is how much it made, or, just like stuff that I would love it. Zoe Zalbrod, who's also in Evanston, she does these great book reviews in her Zoe's Book Log, I think it's called. And they're just often just a few paragraphs, really smart. They don't probably take her more than a couple hours each. Anyway, we talked about this yesterday.
I could do movie reviews and album reviews, and it'd be like, and the headline could either be "I was right" or "I was wrong," and it sort of depends. Like I could have like dumped on some movie that actually turned out like, oh no, that movie was better than I thought it was. Usually, I was right, of course. I mean, the "I was rights" would still be much more than the "I was wrongs." And there's stuff that I didn't like that everyone else liked, and now people are coming around to like, yeah, you're kind of right about that one. Everyone was like, oh my God, 16 Candles was so great when it came out. Not that I reviewed it. I was much younger, but I was just like, no. All the problems you have with it now, I had with it then. Sorry, John Hughes fans.
It's caricatured.
That movie was filmed on my block, so I'm allowed to dump on it.
Oh my God.
Anyway, wonderful talking to you.
Thanks, Mark.
That's all for episode 215 of Caropop. Thanks so much to Christine Sneed for sharing her experiences and insights into her excellent work and the greater publishing world. Check out her Substack, Bookish, at christinesneed.substack.com. I'm a longtime subscriber. I enthusiastically recommend her fiction as well, including her novels, Please Be Advised, Paris He Said, and Little Known Facts. Her wonderful short stories are collected in Direct Sunlight, The Virginity of Famous Men, and Portraits of a Few of the People I've Made Cry. Caropop is produced by Chris Swake, whom I've never made cry, I don't think. Thanks to all who support Caropop. If you'd like to throw something into the Caropop kitty, we'd be much appreciative, and I'll give you a shout out on the next episode. Please go to caropop.com. Thanks so much for listening and being here. I'm Mark Caro. Please follow Caropop on the so-called socials at Caropopcast. You can follow me as well at Mark Caro at MarkCaro. Please share this episode, subscribe here and on YouTube, tell your friends, and return next week for another Caropop conversation. Thanks.